Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Susan Wright. Susan Lucille Wright was born on April 24, 1976, in Houston, Texas, to parents Velma Sue and Jimmy Lawrence Wright. She was the eldest of two children and had a biological sister named Cindy. As a child, Susan was active, sociable, and creatively talented. During her school years, she developed a passion for dancing and aspired to become a choreographer. With her bright and attractive appearance, as well as her slender figure, she drew many admirers and being the center of attention. After completing high school, Susan tried but was unsuccessful in getting into college. To raise funds for her future education, she decided to take some time off. During this period, she found work as a dancer at a well-known nightclub, performing partially nude on stage. She decided to leave her job and use her savings to enroll in evening courses at a nursing school. To support herself and maintain her independence, Susan took a job as a waitress at a restaurant while pursuing her studies. However, she soon discovered that medicine was not her real passion and had trouble paying for her studies. Consequently, she stopped attending her classes to concentrate on her job. In the summer of 1997, 21-year-old Susan met her future husband, Jeffrey Andrew Wright, at the Galveston restaurant where she worked. He was immediately drawn to her beauty and radiant smile, becoming a regular customer and leaving generous tips. After some time, Jeffrey mustered the courage to ask Susan for her phone number. He would call her daily, sometimes multiple times a day, to arrange romantic dates and surprise her with small gestures, such as sending flowers with heartfelt notes to her workplace. In the evenings, he would meet her and walk her home. The man was 8 years older than Susan, but she didn't consider this a significant issue. He was charming, attentive, and caring, which quickly won her over. However, it soon became apparent that Jeffrey struggled with alcohol and substance abuse. He claimed to have overcome his addiction to drugs and promised to quit drinking entirely. Susan, being young and in love for the first time, believed him. She thought that their love could conquer any obstacle. Shortly after, Susan discovered she was pregnant and excitedly shared the news with Jeffrey. Although he seemed pleased about becoming a father, he didn't take any decisive action, such as proposing or suggesting they move in together. Confused by Jeffrey's behavior, Susan took matters into her own hands. She insisted that their child should be born within a married family, and Jeffrey agreed to her terms. By the time they officially got married, Susan was already 8 months pregnant. They chose to have a quiet, intimate wedding without guests or celebrations, rather than a grand ceremony. Around this time, they purchased a home in a quiet area of Harris County, Texas, and moved in a couple of weeks before the birth of their child. In December 1998, they welcomed their first child, a son named Bradley, and appeared to be the perfect family. In 2001, Susan became pregnant again, and in the spring of 2002, she gave birth to a daughter named Kay. The family had a small dog named Buck, a comfortable family car. Jeffrey worked at a local construction company, and after the children were born, Susan became a stay-at-home mom by mutual agreement. She took care of the kids and created a cozy home environment. The neighbors said that Mrs. Susan was a kind person, friendly, sociable, a caring mother, and a loving wife. However, it was later revealed that the reality of their family life was far from perfect. Her husband was extremely demanding in every aspect of their lives. Susan's days were filled with cleaning, doing laundry, and cooking. Jeffrey demanded freshly cooked meals every day, prohibiting her from preparing meals in advance or reheating leftovers. Maintaining a perfect and clean home was a challenging task, especially with 2 small children. Additionally, Jeffrey required his clothes to be washed almost daily, as he refused to wear the same item twice. If Susan failed to meet these expectations, she faced insults, humiliation, and even physical abuse. Moreover, Jeffrey was extremely frugal, providing Susan with a meager weekly allowance of $100 to cover all household expenses, including cooking, childcare, and maintenance. Susan had to keep track of every expense, giving receipts to her husband Jeffrey. However, Jeffrey's behavior was a bigger issue. Despite promising to quit drinking, he continued and started using drugs, downplaying it as light doping for work stress. The substances made him aggressive, causing him to harm Susan and their son. Jeffrey denied his behavior was a problem, claiming Susan knew about his substance use before marriage. His parents sympathized with Susan but felt powerless to intervene. After moving in together, Jeffrey's behavior became increasingly aggressive, leading to physical, emotional, and intimate abuse. He initially apologized, but the violence became regular. Jeffrey would often go to the gym 3 times a week to practice boxing as a stress relief measure. He looked forward to sharing this activity with his son when the boy was older. On January 13, 2003, Jeffrey returned home from the gym agitated and on edge. As Susan prepared dinner, he attempted to teach their 5-year-old son some boxing moves but lost control and struck the child, causing the boy to burst into tears. Susan pretended not to notice the incident, but it was the last straw for her. Following dinner, she put the kids to bed. Meanwhile, Jeffrey stayed in the bedroom, where he continued to take drugs. There are different accounts of what happened next. According to Susan, when she went into the room, Jeffrey assaulted her, attempted to rape her, and tried to stab her with a knife. She claimed she fought back in self-defense after managing to take the knife from him. The events that followed are unclear, with different accounts of what happened. According to Susan, when she entered the bedroom, Jeffrey tried to attack her, sexually assault her, and kill her with a knife. However, she claimed she managed to grab the knife and defended herself, leading to a fight. Her story changed multiple times, but the version told in court, based on the investigation, was considered more believable. Susan decided to use her dance skills to distract her husband and lower his guard. Wearing a short silk robe over her bare body, she put on a seductive show for Jeffrey. She then suggested a role-playing game that involved tying him up, which he agreed to. Using 3 of Jeffrey's neckties, she bound his hands and one leg to the bed. She used the silk belt from her robe to secure his other leg. With Jeffrey immobilized, Susan created a makeshift gag using her underwear, pretending it was part of the intimate game. To set the mood, she lit candles and turned off the lights. Jeffrey was tied to the bed with a gag in his mouth, unable to move or speak. The room was dimly lit. Jeffrey poured hot wax from a candle onto Jeffrey's chest, which was painful but initially seemed like part of a game they were playing. However, when she poured wax onto his genital area, the pain became unbearable. Jeffrey tried to free himself and scream, but he couldn't. His wife, Susan, took a small sharp knife from the kitchen and began stabbing him repeatedly, starting at his groin and moving up his body, slashing his genitals, legs, abdomen, chest, arms, neck, and face. She began slowly, expressing her grievances with each stab, recounting the insults, humiliations, and abuse she had suffered. As she continued, Susan began to cry and stab faster. Experts later counted 193 shallow knife wounds on Jeffrey's body. Most of these wounds were not fatal, and Jeffrey was conscious for most of the ordeal. Susan's actions suggested she was in a state of extreme emotional distress. Her lawyers argued that she was in a state of affect, unable to stop even when Jeffrey showed no signs of life. She had not considered what she would do next or how she would handle the body. Shallow grave in the backyard. She sat next to her husband's body on the floor for hours. Eventually, she looked around the blood-covered bedroom and knew she had to act before dawn. She carefully checked outside through the window, ensuring the coast was clear. Her gaze landed on a shallow pit in the backyard that Jeffrey had dug for a fountain over the weekend. A plan formed instantly. This pit would become her despised husband's grave. To move the body, Susan used a garden wheelbarrow. This raised questions for investigators, as a petite woman was able to single-handedly lift and transport a man twice her weight out of the house. Suspicions of an accomplice arose but were never confirmed. Under the cover of darkness, Susan discreetly relocated the body to the pit and covered it with a thin layer of soil. She then cleaned up, removing the blood-stained curtains and bed linen, placing them in trash bags and dispersing them in different bins. The blood-soaked mattress was flipped over, as Susan was unsure how to properly clean it. She spent the remaining time until dawn scrubbing blood from the floor, walls, and carpet. Scrubbing the carpet is a big deal, with a large stain that couldn't be removed. In an attempt to eliminate any evidence of the violent confrontation, Susan applied bleach to the affected area, hoping the chemicals would destroy any remaining traces. Susan made a distressing call to her husband's parents in Austin, Texas. She was emotional as she recounted the events. Her husband, under the influence, had physically assaulted her and their son, spilled bleach on the carpet, and then ended their relationship before leaving. Jeffrey's parents were shocked and concerned by the news. Although they were aware that their son had his flaws, they felt genuine sympathy for their daughter-in-law. However, when they learned that he had hit their grandchild, they immediately offered for Susan and the children to come and stay with them. Despite their willingness to help, the young mother declined their offer. She added that she planned to file a police report and reveal all the incidents that had occurred at their residence. 2 days later, Susan visited the police station as her husband's sudden disappearance raised increasing concerns and action was necessary. Susan reported that she and her children had been victims of domestic violence perpetrated by her husband and required protection. She successfully obtained a restraining order against her husband, preventing him from approaching her and the children, although she was already aware that he would never be able to come near them again. As evidence, Susan presented bruises and cuts on her arms, which she alleged were inflicted by her husband using keys when she attempted to defend herself. Additionally, Susan had a small bruise on his face and corroborated that his father had struck him. At first, the tearful woman's story seemed believable and logical. She claimed her husband, under the influence of alcohol and substances, had attacked her and their young son. Then, realizing what he had done, he became scared and fled. However, over time, suspicions grew because Jeffrey had not contacted anyone. He appeared to have run away without his belongings, documents, or mobile phone. He didn't show up for work or visit his parents, and none of his friends or neighbors had seen him. It was as if he had vanished. Susan found it unbearable to stay in the house where she confronted her husband. She couldn't shake the feeling he was still alive and would rise for revenge. She was losing her grip on reality. Even their dog Buck sensed it, constantly barking and trying to dig up the yard where Jeffrey was buried. On January 17th, Susan went to her mother's house with her children. When her mother saw her daughter in person, she fully realized the severity of the situation. Even though she had already been aware of it, Velma directly asked if she had killed her husband, and her daughter broke down in tears, nodding in admission. The daughter then confessed to the crime, revealing the location of her husband's body, and repeatedly expressed uncertainty about what to do next. Following her mother's advice, Susan reached out to lawyer Neil Davis the next day and confessed to killing her husband and attempting to cover up the crime. After gathering all the details, the experienced defense attorney considered possible scenarios and contacted the Harris County District Attorney's Office on January 19th. Davis reported Susan's confession, including the burial of her husband's body in their backyard, and stated that she was willing to provide a full statement at the police station. On January 24, 2003, Susan voluntarily went to the police station, intent on making a full confession. However, her account was disjointed, with confusing details and occasional contradictions. She sometimes referred to her late husband as if he were still alive, expressed fear of him, and requested protection. Consequently, Susan underwent a psychiatric evaluation. The results revealed she had suffered a nervous breakdown and was experiencing depression. Despite this, the evaluation found that Susan was still capable of understanding the actions she had taken. When investigators uncovered the remains of Jeffrey from the makeshift grave in the backyard, they were shocked by the brutality of the scene, having never encountered. Experts counted a total of 193 knife wounds on the victim's body, distributed across various areas, including the groin, legs, shoulders, arms, abdominal area, chest, neck, and face. The majority of these wounds were superficial, meaning they were not life-threatening on their own. However, one head wound was severe enough to have caused death. The large number of superficial wounds suggests that the victim endured a prolonged and agonizing death, likely while still conscious, as his wife repeatedly stabbed him with a small knife. The victim's wrists and ankles showed deep marks from the ties and belt used to bind him. These injuries indicated that the victim had attempted to free himself but was unsuccessful. The ties and belt were still on the body when it was found. Additionally, there were traces of candle wax on the victim's chest and groin area. Susan claimed that the candle wax was an accident, resulting from her husband knocking over a lit candle. However, the prosecution argued that the hot wax was more likely used as a form of torture to inflict suffering on the bound victim. Furthermore, the victim's mouth contained his wife's underwear, which acted as a gag to prevent him from screaming or calling for help. Toxicological tests showed the deceased had alcohol and several controlled substances in his system, which could have led to aggressive and irrational behavior. Initially, the bedroom where the confrontation occurred seemed normal, except for a large bleach stain on the carpet. However, upon closer inspection using special chemical agents and equipment, it became clear that Susan had spent considerable time cleaning up the scene. Once wiped away blood traces were revealed, the true extent of the violence became apparent. Blood was found throughout the room, including on the ceiling, and the mattress was saturated with it. The trial began in late February 2004, with Susan having already spent a year in custody. Her children were being cared for by her parents and sister Cindy. Her lawyer was well prepared, having worked extensively with Susan to build her case. During the trial, Susan frequently broke down in tears as she recounted the events of that horrific night and the abuse she suffered leading up to it. She claimed to have endured years of cruelty and violence at the hands of her husband. The defendant, Susan, claimed that on the evening of the incident, her husband returned home from training in an agitated state. He began demonstrating boxing techniques to their 5-year-old son, Bradley, and said the boy would also take up boxing. When Bradley refused, his father hit him in the face. Susan put the children to bed and then tried to have a serious talk with her husband, urging him to seek help at a clinic. However, he became angry, grabbed his keys, and tried to leave. Susan attempted to stop him, which led to a struggle that caused injuries to her palms and wrists. According to Susan, her husband then struck her, causing her to fall and momentarily lose her bearings. After regaining composure, Susan saw her husband Jeffrey holding a knife, but her testimony became inconsistent. Her lawyer argued she was in a state of affect, leading her to seize the knife and strike Jeffrey. Susan claimed she secured him to a cart with ties and a belt after the confrontation, and candle wax accidentally landed on his body. However, the defendant had no explanation for why her underwear was found in the victim's mouth. In contrast, the prosecution presented a more convincing and logical case. Expert testimony revealed that the victim's wrist and ankle wounds were inflicted before death, likely as part of a ruse to restrain the victim. This also provided a plausible explanation for the gag in the victim's mouth. Additionally, The angle of the injuries suggested that the perpetrator was positioned on top of the victim, rather than struggling with him, which would have resulted in different injury patterns. All the cuts on the victim were inflicted from the front, indicating that the attack occurred while he was lying on his back, unable to move. It was unclear whether Susan had planned her husband's murder in advance and intentionally used the pit he dug for a fountain as a makeshift grave. Prosecutors, however, suspected that she had carefully orchestrated the crime, motivated by the potential insurance payout. The case drew widespread media attention, with Susan being labeled the blue-eyed butcher or blonde meat grinder by the press. Jeffrey's family demanded the harshest possible sentence, while many of their neighbors felt sorry for Susan, recalling instances where she had bruises that she attributed to her own clumsiness, but which may have been signs of physical abuse. Prosecutors initially sought a life sentence for Susan, but later reduced their request to 45 years in prison. In March 2004, she was found guilty and sentenced to 25 years. She showed no emotion when the judge delivered the verdict, appearing detached from the proceedings. A year later, her lawyer's attempt to appeal the decision was rejected. In 2008, Susan and her defense team filed another appeal, which was influenced by new testimony from a previously unknown witness. Misty McKell, wife of former NFL champion Steve McKell, was a key witness. She had a lengthy relationship with Jeffrey Wright in the mid-1990s and was briefly engaged to him. However, she suffered physical abuse, humiliation, and cruel treatment from Jeffrey, leading her to end the engagement and cut ties. Following this new information in Jeffrey's testimony, Susan's prison sentence was reduced to 20 years. She became eligible for parole in 2014 at age 38 but was denied. A second denial followed in July 2017. After 16 years in prison, Susan Wright was released in the winter of 2020 at age 44. She was met by reporters and photographers, causing her to break down in tears and asked to be left alone. Her trial received extensive media coverage, including a broadcast on court TV.